Today's final episode of Socially Democratic for 2021 is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We partner with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across the globe to develop community organising strategies and train your leaders or your organisers to build power from within your community. And in 2021, with what's left of it, only a couple of days, but even next year as well, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to share their stories, inspire others, take action and organise communities for change. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Today's podcast is also presented to you by Morris Blackburn Lawyers. Who knew that using a different coloured pen could make a will invalid, or that removing some staples means the document is no longer legally recognised? Morris Blackburn's expert lawyers know all the important tips and make creating a will super easy. Simply complete the online form and they'll arrange a time to discuss your needs, prepare your will and store it at no extra cost. Search Morris Blackburn Wills today to get started on your affordable lawyer-written will. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast out every Friday that dives into the progressive campaign issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And this is our, as I said, it's our final episode for 2021. And we wrap up each year. We always finish off with our Victorian state politics year in review, which I always do with the wonderful Harriet Shing, who is the Labor MP for the Eastern Region Victoria in the upper house of the state parliament. And if anyone's listened to our previous episodes, we kind of do a review, but then we always get really off topic and end up talking about just a whole bunch of random stuff. So, you know, I'm recording this now. We actually haven't done the episode. She's coming in about 15 minutes. I know that we're going to get off topic, and I'm going to have to ask the question about the miniature donkeys right off the bat, because I made the mistake of doing that at the end last year. I won't make that mistake again. Okay, anyway, so that's Harriet. Looking forward to seeing Harriet again. She's actually coming into the Dunn Street studio, so that's going to be great. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher. If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser and Spotify. And apparently Spotify is adding a 5-star review system to their app at the end of 2021. So be sure to give us a 5-star review after you've done listening to today's episode, if that feature has already been made available. If it hasn't, then maybe do it in a couple of weeks' time. And for all the updates, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. We're not doing a show next week, which is the week between Christmas and New Year, but we will be back, obviously, for a new season of Socially Democratic in the first week of 2022. Sounds weird saying that. But anyway, let's get to today's episode with Harriet Shing. Taping this one on a Tuesday in Melbourne, and it's the final episode of Social Democratic for 2021. Hello, Harriet. It's Stephen here. I hope you're keeping well. It's the 21st of December.
I am keeping well. I thought when you were going to say we're taping this here that you were going to say on Super 8 and it was going to end up with crackly, amazing film quality, but that's obviously not where you were going. Anyway, lovely to see you in 3 dimensions.
Yeah, it's good to have you back, and I'm glad that we've kept up this tradition of wrapping up the year.
When do you think something becomes a tradition?
I think 3 times.
3. So we're now at a tradition?
Yeah.
Can we call ourselves iconic yet for doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Do you know what really annoys me is when you visit like a sporting club or something and you'll see that they've got like some sort of annual shield.
Yes.
And it was in 86, 87 and 88 and then that's
and then it stopped.
Why did it stop?
I know. Sometimes I wonder, because I do see a lot of regional and rural sporting associations and clubs, and it's often because of very, very specific niche disputes around the sort of shield that should be used.
Yeah.
Whereby you'll then go from various kind of backgrounds. So you might start with your mahogany finish and then move into a black butt or a red gum, closely followed by something in oak, and then go back to some other wood that someone else wanted. So it's... But, you know, these are the mysteries. This is the tapestry.
And I am committed to seeing things through. People who know me will know that. In 1989, oh, by the way, anyone who's never listened to this episode before will know that we're not going to talk about state politics.
No, there's nothing in this of any real substantive value other than people who want to eavesdrop on a
I have
conversation.
a lot of questions to ask you that are not related to politics. I do have questions that Rebecca, our producer, has written excellent questions that will review the year. But anyway.
I've never been known really to answer a question in either a direct fashion or indeed at all without significant preambles.
Yep. And there's no clock. I don't know how long this is going to go for.
We're not great at self-regulation, are we?
Anyway.
Yeah.
So in 1989,
yes,
I wanted a skateboard for my Christmas. It was Back to the Future 2 had just come out.
Oh, I remember it well.
Back to the Future
I wanted the jacket.
Is my favourite.
You wanted the skateboard.
I wanted the skateboard. Back to the Future is my favourite film, still is. I'm going to hopefully...
Can we come back to that?
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Cool.
I really went the hard yards with mum and dad about, dropping hints everywhere about I want a skateboard. So Christmas morning, I wake up and I sort of look under the tree and there's no sort of long-shaped kind of present, and I'm like going, what's going on here? And mum and dad got up and said, oh, your Christmas present is in the garage downstairs. So I'm going, you don't need to put a skateboard in the garage. Like, how big is this?
Unless it's a car.
Yeah, well, 89.
Unless someone got you your own tractor.
I must have been 14. So, yeah, I wasn't getting a car at 14. Ran downstairs to find a table tennis table there with a bow on it. That was my Christmas present. We'd been on holiday that winter, and we were staying in a condominium, pool, thing.
As was the fashion at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is the 80s. Bought out of my brain. And I was just playing table tennis like Forrest Gump all day. And I would grab any stranger that walks past and put the bat in their hand and say, you, let's go, best of 21. And I would just play everyone.
It's like the pandemic and people talking to each other in supermarkets. You just make eye contact with anyone across from the lettuces just for human interaction.
Yeah. So I got a table tennis table for Christmas. So... I make lemonade out of lemons, and so I decided that year we would have
tables out of tennis.
Yeah, we would have a Christmas cup, and my family, there's a number of us, and we had this big tournament, and I lost to my brother Jared in the final, and the next year we did it again and again, and eventually I got a trophy. And
did you have to do terry toweling shorts and matching singlets, because it's all starting to sound a bit. Royal Tenenbaums, I reckon, in terms of the aesthetic, which probably explains a little bit about where you've ended up, formative years-wise.
I don't know. Why would you think I like Wes Anderson?
I do not know why you would like Wes Anderson. Can we do it? Can you just can you break the fourth wall at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Just.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so fast forward to 2021.
Yes.
The 30th. I've missed two because twice I was overseas for Christmas and it didn't happen.
Yes.
But that tournament continues to this day.
And do you still hold tight the anguish and disappointment of not having a skateboard?
I've kind of let it go.
You have let it go.
And it's been replaced by the fact that I've never won the Frank Donnelly Senior Memorial Trophy, and it just pisses me off greatly.
Do you have a shield?
We have a trophy.
But do you have a shield?
No, it's a...
Does it have plates on it?
It's got everyone's names on it.
Oh, it does have people's names.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
So it's portable and you can take it around. I think you should aim for something like a standard that you can actually just carry in as the defender of last year's tournament. I think you need to up the ante, because if you can't go for ridiculous sports props to demonstrate prestige, then where's your sense of healthy competition?
It's interesting you said about the Richie Tenenbaum sort of garb, the feel, that kind of thing, because I actually thought about this year really coming with some kind of get up.
You need an Owen Wilson style kind of arrangement that means a terry toweling headband with matching singlet and tiny terry toweling shorts, and then those those really flat sand shoes that provide absolutely no arch support whatsoever.
The Dunlop volleys.
They were even pre the volley.
Right.
Not as cool as a volley.
No.
Man, volleys were so cool.
I know.
Yeah, I loved them. Better than your KT26, which is what I grew up with.
Yeah.
I had the KT26 and I coveted volleys for a really long time. I also coveted Doc Martens, and when I got my... See, look at us wandering. Walk with us.
I haven't thought about Back to the
Walk with
Future.
us, dear listeners.
Coming back to that.
That's right. And thus we wandered off track, never to be heard of again.
Yeah.
I really, really wanted a pair of docks. And so when I got my first job at the ice creamery in Main Street, Lilydale, I had a scooping arm like no other back in those days. My pact with my parents was, because docks were really expensive, that if I bought one, they would buy the other. Mm-hmm. So I think they were about $100 at the time. And so I saved up and got this pair of docks, these brown Doc Martens that I wore as school shoes, but then also recreationally, because you want to be able to, multitask. I wore them until year 12, and the school was always saying, Harriet, they're not regulation shoes. You need to wear regulation shoes. And I would say, well, no, I've got a problem with my arches. I need to wear these Doc Martens. Right. To which the answer was always, okay, that's fine, but you're going to need to bring in a note. And this went on from year 7 through to year 12, because my feet were, tiny and not going to get much bigger over the course of secondary school. Yeah. And I remember a teacher coming up to me at year 12 speech night saying, we're never going to get that note from you about your shoes, are we? I did air punch.
That's brilliant.
I was like Judd Nelson at the end of The Breakfast Club.
Are Doc Martens the greatest emblem of the Gen X generation?
Yeah, they're pretty... I didn't wear them with quite that level of cool. Mine seemed more medicinal.
How high a boot?
No. They were a shoe.
Just a straight up shoe. I think they were
weren't
the coolest.
8-ups or 10-ups. Yeah, I really tried to make them cool. I didn't quite carry it off though. You know how kids had Stussy pants?
Yep.
And Nike Airs?
Yeah.
I was never that cool.
I was never going to... I didn't even bother asking Mum and Dad if they would buy me a pair of Air Jordans, just because they were like, not in your leaf.
My brother got rolled for his Air Jordans at Mooroolbark Station.
That was a thing.
Yeah, and we've since removed the level crossing at Mooroolbark, and I've got to say there was a sense of perverse delight about the fact that the platform where my beautiful big brother lost his prize Air Jordans is now gone forever, along with the pain.
There we go. See, we've talked about politics
he
now.
was picked up with his socks. Well,
that's
right, we got to level crossing.
We're done. Okay, great.
Yeah, infrastructure.
Okay, Back to the Future.
Yes. So, it's your favourite film. Why?
1985, I'm 10. I remember I was down in Melbourne, grew up in country Victoria in Warragul, and I was down with my mum and my sister, and it was a Sunday night, and I think it was a school night the next day, so we had to hightail back to Warragul. But my sister could somehow convince Mum, let's go see a movie. She's much older than me. And we went and saw Back to the Future, and I was so excited about this. One, going to see a film on a school night on a Sunday night was huge. Two, in Melbourne, big city of lights.
It is big city.
Amazing. It was warm. I remember the weather was warm. And I just walked out of that cinema thinking this was arguably the greatest piece of culture I've ever seen.
Why did you see Back to the Future 2 before seeing Back to the Future?
I saw Back to the Future in 85 and it got released.
That's a key piece of information that was missing when
no,
you started this story.
No, because Back to the Future 2 came out in 1989.
Right.
I wanted a skateboard because that was then the hoverboard.
Yeah, no, I know. And it also, there was the jacket, which had the automatically adjusting sleeves. Yeah. And because I have no sense of spatial awareness and no catch reflex, I know nothing about sport and much to the amusement of everyone who knows me, I'm not really good at trying to even pretend. So the skateboard, I mean, I respected the hoverboard, but not nearly as much as I coveted that jacket.
The size adjusting fit.
The size adjusting fit.
What about the shoes, the night shoes, the automatic?
Yeah. Well, that's right. So they were not dissimilar to the Reebok Pump, which, as you'll recall, had that small really low-tech bubble arrangement at the top that enabled you to push air into the shoe for probably not a snugger fit, but just a massive placebo effect and some bragging rights with your friends. Yeah.
We used to go into the sports store in Warragul and just pump the shoe up and the guy would chase us out of the store.
Hooligans.
I know. Ridiculous, right? Yeah. So I'm hoping, touch wood, to go my annual leave is hopefully going to be in Los Angeles this January. Actually,
or just watching videos
January,
on YouTube?
No, literally.
Right.
And I've found all the locations, the filming locations of Back to the Future that I want to go check out.
So they'll almost be contemporary with the period that Back to the Future was capturing.
His house, his mum's house, George McFly's house.
Yeah, but when was it? When was Back to the Future 2 set?
Oh, 2015.
You're late.
I know.
You're only 6 years late.
No flying cars.
Well, that's outrageous, isn't it?
What a letdown that was.
Do you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Everyone's ideas of the future, apart from like Leonardo da Vinci, who was just, obviously the crowd pleaser of everyone and got everything right. Everyone's missed it entirely in terms of like Soylent Green. We're not there yet. It's not people.
No.
There's a whole lot of things around Planet of the Apes.
Yep.
That, as far as I'm aware, hasn't happened.
Not to my knowledge, although Donald Trump was a bit apish.
Was he? I don't think a bit simian. I actually think that does a disservice to apes.
Probably.
Although I did read the other day, apparently there is a war going on between apes and chimpanzees over territory that's rapidly disappearing due to deforestation. So there is, in fact, dear listener, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, in fact, it is coming true. Yeah.
The screen, the TV screens, where there's multiple screens, we have that. We
do have that. And there was, Aldous Huxley had some stuff come true. Brave New World has sort of talked about linking up global villages and tech and the way that people connect. Yep.
I was trying to think what else was in Back to the Future 2 that sort of came to fruition.
Oh, no, the rehydration of the food.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
We don't quite have that, where a pizza is the size of a 20-cent piece and it blows up to be a family size.
No, but we kind of have remember there was faxes in all of the rooms. We kind of have we've actually moved past faxes now, but...
the oldie-timey righty machiney. Yeah, the faxes and modems as well. So I've recently, again, let's just take it back to politics for a minute. So I've become the Parliamentary Secretary for Digital Government, and one of the things that we're talking about is the way in which AI and machine learning is changing the way that services are delivered with all of these other knock-on consequences. And I made a joke the other day about Palm Pilots and Blackberries, and in fact everyone laughed. So I was right there in my zone around talks about, everything from the Commodore 64 through to the dot matrix printer.
We still give one of our mates shit for buying an iRiver. Do you remember them?
Oh, were they like an iPod?
Yeah, it was
they were the yes. Can I make a confession?
You bought one?
Yeah, I had one.
I had the data cassette, what were they called? The mini discs. Mini discs?
Mini disc. Now that went the way of the Segway, didn't it?
Yeah, I invested heavily in that. I thought that was, I remember I bought it in Akihabara in Tokyo, and I thought I was way ahead of the game.
Like Blu-ray. You can think of all these things that...
Laser discs.
We've had such a crossroads, haven't we, where things can either go on to be amazing, like Google Glass. Do you remember that? People walking around with the weird spectacle with the arms sticking out of it like they were Terminator.
Yeah.
And initially these people were onto it like, this is an insignia of my membership of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But nobody else thought it was cool at all, and they died really quickly.
Yeah. I was trying to think what else is kind of...
The Segway.
Yeah.
Somebody on Twitter superimposed my head onto a Segway driver the other day in an attempt to actually just be really lovely. It's Twitter, it is what it is. You've got to take anything that's not actually about being a virulent cesspit is something you've just got to take and embrace. Until I pointed out that, it was a bit cruel to put me on a Segway when, in fact, the inventor of the Segway died after reversing his Segway off a cliff. So, I took that as perhaps a little bit of a subtext around politicians. Where we fit in all of this.
The Miami police, are they still kicking around in Segways?
Well, I think that they had originally trialled it. I think there were a few utilities companies that trialled it.
Yeah.
There was a whole lot of early interest in the Segway around post-delivery and around checking meters and things like that. But they never really pitched it into one key target market. And I think that was the great failure. Because everyone gets around on scooters or bikes or
the skateboards that are like remote
hoverboards, for example.
Yeah, well, you're kind of getting a bit like hoverboards now, aren't we? Yeah. That sort of, and the ones that play music as you go.
Oh, I couldn't do that. I actually really wanted a boombox to be able to carry around on my shoulder for some time. When I was little, I do recall getting a cardboard box and walking around with the stereo on.
I would have called it a ghetto blaster.
Yeah, I don't know. That probably reflects our different demographics, doesn't it? See, like chimps and apes, these are our lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there can't be too much difference between growing up in Lilydale and growing up in Warragul, really.
Well, what is it? 3140 was mine. You were 3820 because I lived in Warragul for a time.
Very good.
Yeah, Warracool, as I like to call it. So, it's as a town, it's pretty much joined up to Druin now, which is pretty much in the process of joining up to Pakenham. It is absolutely crazy. The population growth and expansion through the southeast is
It's nuts.
Unbelievable.
And everyone talks about the northwest as being this big growth corridor, but the southeast of metropolitan Melbourne is equally just as
huge.
Yeah.
It's huge, and particularly because of lockdown and the restrictions and people being able to work remotely, at least where they're not required on site. Because that's been opened up so much now around attitudes changing, being able to commute once or twice a week down to Melbourne and having better train services and better roads is something that has opened it up to a whole lot of people around housing affordability, particularly for people for whom Pakenham is now, they're outpriced. We're talking about 700,000, for a relatively straightforward build. Warragul's not far off it, and so it's pushing out now to Moe and back to Traralgon, around what those estate developments look like too.
Which is nuts, because there is that whole big estate that's been built around Warragul at the moment. I had to go back to Warragul for a funeral last week, and I took one of my schoolmates back to, and he hadn't been in Warragul for years. His family's moved out of there. His brain was exploding at the change in the town, and even the last sort of 4 or 5 years since he's been.
Yeah, when I was living there, you could see every week the top of a hill being lopped off and terraced to be made into residential housing. And this has thrown up a number of really interesting challenges for agriculture as well, because it's prime agricultural land. It's this really rich organic soil, and
It's God's soil.
It's amazing. Anyone with black thumbs should give it a go in West Gippsland, because you won't come off second best. But it's been a real challenge because farmers are essentially being pushed further and further south or north. Into the valley is again a challenge because there are already established lots there. But it's a big consideration around what we do to manage our population growth on the one hand, and infrastructure that needs to sit around that, and how we get our food, because it's a food bowl. It's one of our highest producing parts of the state as far as particularly beef and dairy and veg are concerned.
I don't want to bury the lead, because I did in last year's podcast, because I asked you this question last, and I'm going to now, that we've already talked probably for about an hour, but how are the miniature donkeys going?
I'm so glad that you raised that.
I know you are.
Completely unsolicited. So for the record,
Yep.
I haven't pushed you into doing this,
No,
which is...
It literally is my first question.
So we've now gotten on to the first question of the interview. Cool.
Yeah.
So they're amazing, and I've got to say they're testing my patience very sorely as toddlers. So they're 2 now, and I erected tiny little fences about knee high. These
Because they're miniature donkeys.
miniature donkey. You don't need a lot to dissuade a miniature donkey until the donkey really decides that it wants something, and so in order to actually carve out a piece of garden to grow some veggies in, and maybe have some flowers that wouldn't be trashed and eaten like AC/DC in a hotel room.
Yep.
I put up this fencing, so click and collect. I had dozens and dozens and dozens of these interlocking fence panels delivered, and it was all great until not that long ago, when I looked out, and I've called it Donkatraz, which is basically a way of preventing the donkeys, from actually getting out or in to the one spot, this tiny little island that I want to keep for myself in what is otherwise a really large space for them to gallop and frolic and do what they do. I looked out from my computer screen a couple of days ago onto the garden, and I looked and watched as one of my small long-eared sons, Sam, wandered over to Donkatraz, looked up at me because he can see me watching him, and then just pushed one of the fence panels over, sauntered into the garden bed and started eating things. And because I was at my computer and couldn't leave, I was forced to see out of the corner of my eye, in my peripheral vision, this adorable beast trash everything that I've worked so hard towards. And it's The strawberries haven't been touched yet, but I tell you what, there's a lot of fortification going on. So we're now in a full-blown battle of wits, and I'd like to think that if that's not testing my mettle and making me into a better politician to just stick at what is otherwise a pretty impossible task, then I can't think of really anything else that's going to improve me in that way.
I would imagine that whilst they may lack stature, they would be strong beasts though, right?
Yes, not so much.
Like
So
George Gregan, like not a height, but man, power to weight ratio.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking less George Gregan and more Mr. Miyagi.
Oh.
So, that immovable kind of force.
Yep.
When they don't want to do something, they're just not going to do it. And correspondingly, if they've got their mind set on destroying something, they're going to.
Okay.
You've just got to roll with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my own tiny little horticultural pandemic is occurring probably right now as I'm talking to you. So I'll probably get home to a wasteland.
Have you considered, I don't want to say renting, but,
Adjusting?
Yeah, leasing them out for like nativity scenes at local Catholic primary schools?
I have actually been contacted by a number of people who want to borrow the donkeys, and it's really strange. Before any major religious festival, I don't even know how my number's gotten out there. It almost seems to have been circulated by people.
How would people know that Harriet Shing's got
the faith-based communities
donkeys
around Victoria? Well, I've had calls from the west, so from Geelong, right up through to Melton, right down through Cranbourne, and then now out to Lakes Entrance, from people saying to me, one guy started recently by saying, "Listen, I'm a Liberal voter, but I'm wondering what you're doing with your donkeys on Christmas Eve and whether perhaps you might bring them for a nativity scene. They would only be required to amble around." At which point I say, firstly, it's not about how you vote. Secondly, how is it that you think that my donkeys are going to get something out of this arrangement? Because if I go to them and say, "Hey, you're being asked to appear somewhere," their natural response to me is going to be, "Well, what's in it for us?"
Exactly.
If you don't give me something that makes it a worthwhile trip for them, then it's just not going to happen.
Yep.
And that tends to scare people off.
Donkeys. The donkeys would say, "I don't want some sort of half-assed bit roll in this.
Don't give me a key ring at the end of it all, or a certificate."
Yeah.
So I'm working up to being able to take them around to kinders and aged care retirement facilities. Like you can just sit down and they'll just come up like these enormous, weird, hilarious, funny dogs, and they'll push you, and not hard, but they're curious and smart and amazing.
Easter as well, actually, because Jesus rode a donkey into Jerusalem.
Jesus
for
rode a donkey. Mary rode a donkey. Donkeys. So around Anzac Day. Donkeys as beasts of burden and animals of war, and I'm really on a winner here.
You really are.
Except for the fact that they're destroying the garden. But we've got horses down the back, and the donkeys. I tell you what, they take a set to people, so they'll either like you or be indifferent, and there's not much that can change that.
Yeah.
And so every morning the horses will look very excitedly to the donkeys to see when their little mates are going to come down and play. And every morning the donkeys get out and amble down almost within reach of saying hello to the horses, and then just go, nah.
Attitude.
The attitude. Nice. Small but feisty.
Okay, very good. All right, I'm going to ask you a question.
Tick that off. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's get into it.
COVID, that happened this year.
Well, it's still happening, yeah.
And it's still happening.
Yeah.
You personally, thinking when the Hogmanay, the bells strike 12, and we're now in 2021. I asked this of Annika Wells and Josh Burns in our federal recap. In your mind, did you sort of think, because a lot of people were saying, "Oh, I'm glad 2020 is out of the way. That was a disaster because of COVID and stuff." And I just don't think that the virus sticks to the Christian calendar of dates, and that we were still going to have a challenge going into 2021. What were your thoughts going into 2021?
Well, I think we all hoped that there would be a bookmark that we could put at the end of 2020, and that things would actually turn a corner. And as you might remember, back in the mists of time that was about a year ago, we had actually loosened restrictions. And so the border with New South Wales, for example, was open, and we did have the opportunity to catch up with family and friends. And so there was at least a sense of anticipation that we would be seeing the end of the pandemic as we knew it. And So with that sense of optimism comes a sense of disbelief when that doesn't come to pass. And I think that our previous experience, anyone who'd not been around for the 1914 Spanish flu pandemic would not have appreciated just how hard it is and how taxing it is to have things backslide as a virus evolves and mutates. And I think that everyone was really hoping, particularly after the lockdowns and particularly after restrictions and all of the dismay and grief and anger and frustration that came with that there would be an end point. And I think we pegged that to the calendar. Yeah. But again, when it came to New Year's Eve, people were being warned that they needed to come back home to Victoria so as not to be stuck in New South Wales, given that case numbers were jumping around again. And we see, as at today's date, we've got over 3,000 cases a day in New South Wales. We've got over 100 cases a day in South Australia. Queensland is also staring down some pretty significant growth in numbers. In Victoria, we're steadily climbing in our numbers at about 1,200, but you look to what's happening internationally. The Netherlands is about to go into a snap 2-week lockdown. We've got a curfew in Ireland. The US and New York in particular is sending salutary warnings to everywhere it possibly can around what's happening now as far as not just restrictions and not just case numbers, but health systems that are really straining under the weight of the increased demand, but also the backlog of things like elective surgery and things like screenings and tests that are so important for general health and wellbeing. And we're yet to see the rollout of all of the shots that are required to maximise protection against Omicron in particular. And again, for the most vulnerable in our communities, it's particularly hard. We're relying on everyone to do the right thing for people who are immunocompromised or immunosuppressed, for children, for people who don't have that natural capacity through the vaccination program to get the level of protection that they need to do the right thing. And that's where, again, it's been a really fraught 12 months, particularly around the way that certain parts of the debate have been held captive by very small but very vocal parts of the population. And that's done some real damage, I think, in the way that we as a community have been able to come together and work on constructive solutions rather than division and protests and misinformation, most importantly.
What do you think the key learnings are from a government standpoint going through the experience of 2021? Because it was different to 2020, and I noticed that there was, and we had the Premier on a couple of weeks ago and he's talked a bit about it as well, but I want to get your thoughts on it. The constant adjustment by the government to work out, well, what is the core purpose of our actions? What are we trying to achieve at this moment in time? Because at the start of 2021, we didn't have a Delta variant, I don't think. In the first instance, we were really focusing on just trying to break the back of it, but then that kind of changed in the second half of the year. So what are the lessons that you think the government's taken out of it? And then how do we take those lessons into 2022 with this Omicron variant spreading?
I think one of the lessons that has been learned is that there's no one single solution to the issues at play. So I think the first and correct starting point was the precautionary principle around public health advice. That was a really necessary part of using an evidence-based approach through epidemiological advice, through sharing research and information, through the international experience, to understand what was necessary or what was available to stop the spread in the first instance from taking hold through international arrivals or through transmission in a community setting. And that's where hotel quarantine, in the absence of the Commonwealth having dedicated facilities, which it's now actually stepping up to deliver, including at Mickleham, that we needed to make do with what we had. And this is where I think that when we go back to the pandemic planning requirements and the plan that the Commonwealth had that it needed to act on, that languished, it gathered dust. with the benefit of hindsight, we would have actually had a national framework and had a national plan and had the pieces in place that could address pandemic management and response in a number of different ways. And we saw, I think, in just the most devastating of ways, from the aged care outbreaks and the failures of communication that are currently the subject of an inquiry, through to the way in which the Ruby Princess landing and docking and the lack of information being exchanged with Border Force and New South Wales health officials, through to the way in which interstate boundaries and borders were managed, which the Victorian Ombudsman has talked about recently, that we need to get better at sharing information. We need to get better at understanding who has responsibility for what. And this is where I am still, like so many others, really critical of the Commonwealth and the rollout that some people have called a stroll-out of the vaccine. This whole idea that it's not a race, I mean, that's something that has really, it's not just been an embarrassment, it's been a shame to see that we started out in such a strong position because of our geography, because of our capacity to actually limit the influx of people and therefore transmission of COVID, that we've ended up with a situation where we then sat on our hands as a country because we didn't have enough vaccine ordered. We didn't have anything settled around local manufacture. We didn't diversify the offering that we were looking for, and there's a lot to learn in that too. How do we make sure that we've got the right biomedical investment, and the Moderna and mRNA manufacture here in Victoria it's such an important part of that development. Mickleham and the quarantine facility will be really important as well, but we need to get the vaccines out, and we need to make sure that people are getting their booster, and we've changed the timeframes there. So I think it's about being dexterous and about being able to evolve with the way in which the virus moves and the strains of the virus move, and adapt and change. And it's also about social license. I think that there are limits to what you can order people to do if there's not buy-in from the community around wanting to do the right thing. And that's where, again, the personal connections that people make with the people that they love, the people that they know, the people that they work with, who are relying on us all to do the right thing, are the things that make a difference. They're the things that mean that people check in using their QR codes, or wear masks in specific higher risk settings, or make sure that they're having a rapid antigen test, which lots of people are doing. Lots of families are doing for Christmas this year, simply because grandparents in particular are at really high risk, particularly in settings with children and young children who, as we know, can transmit the Omicron variant very, very quickly, and we see that from the outbreaks in schools.
It's interesting, actually, anecdotally, just noticing people's behaviour in the days leading up to Christmas. Just I saw a thing on the Batuta Advocate.
A fine publication.
Yeah, very funny post of a guy in full PPE equipment, the whole thing. And it's this guy's taking all precautions before he gets ready to go overseas. And I went, oh, that's me. But just talking to sort of family and friends who we'd organised maybe some sort of catch-up for like an old school reunion or whatever. And we've all gone, let's just not do that. Like, if we all want to see our actual family at Christmas, let's just kind of lay low. Watching people change their behaviours and prioritising certain moments in the calendar to do because of the concern about the current uptick in virus spread is good to see. I think that people are starting to make those adjustments, really. But also at the same time, we want to see some leadership from government, in particular federal government, pushing out this need to. I think, sure, I mean, neither of us are health experts, but like if getting vaccinations,
we'll leave that to the people on social media.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
But if what we learnt from sort of the second half of the year was we're going to vaccinate our way out of the most recent lockdown, that surely getting a booster shot is the next step. And it's maybe not even calling it a booster, it's the third shot.
It is the third shot. If
you want to get fully vaccinated, you need to get the third shot. And like Morrison is just, once again, just goes missing on this stuff time and time again. This guy is just a shit leader.
Well, I mean, there's a few things in that. I think it's almost expected that the Prime Minister will be AWOL when it comes to difficult policy decisions and discussion. It's almost expected that he will capitalise on the daggy dad persona that he's cultivated really carefully since becoming PM. And it's almost to be expected that he will dismiss any criticism with a pretty significant and palpable degree of contempt, and that actually passes muster in the main in terms of the way in which it's reported, and everyone rolls their eyes and sort of moves on. And one of the great concerns I think that arises from that is that there's a lack of accountability, that if you're able to just play a daggy dad card and dismiss something with a grab and continue to hammer home strange phrases like rays of light and beams of hope and shots of positivity or whatever it is that the turn of phrase might be on any given day, then people actually not only roll their eyes at what you say when you're being daggy, and not only dismiss pretty readily what it is that you might not do as a leader, but you become white noise, which means then that it falls to your opponent to fill that space and to be a viable alternative leader. And I think that's the challenge for Labor at a federal level, is being able to stand for something that amounts to a better alternative and something that will unstick voters from a preparedness to roll with the devil they know. We haven't yet, I think, come to the point where people are being meaningfully impacted by federal government decisions in a way that I think we will. And that's where people's minds will begin to change, despite what they may read in the papers or hear on the radio. It's then about saying, well, hold on a second, my grandmother can't get her booster, or my neighbour can't get his booster, or my child's creche has got an outbreak and I'm not getting the support that I need. And I'm not in a position to be able to go overseas to see my dying relatives. These are the sorts of things that will prompt people, I think, to reassess what sort of leadership has been coming from Canberra. But at the moment, I think we're not there yet. I think that Scott Morrison has done an extraordinary job of being as accountable as a handful of smoke.
I do wonder about how his leadership has gone down in Western Sydney.
Do you think that he actually thinks about that in terms of what the numbers look like for him, though?
Yeah, I think that he knows his pathway to retaining, perhaps the White House, to retaining government.
If only.
Yeah. Is through Western Sydney and a swag of seats in Queensland.
Yeah, I think that, again, he knows well the short memories that people have. And until and unless that rage is galvanised into people changing their vote, it's pretty easy for someone to come along with big teeth and a pastel collar and say, here's your new insert name of thing here. We've seen time after time these examples of no accountability, decision-making on the fly, questionable decision-making around merit, and the disproportionate divide between coalition-held seats on the one hand and not on the other. And, this is something which I think has become a bit of an albatross for this government. But again, until it affects people personally, these things remain at large as concepts and ideas. And because I think people in the main think that politicians, that we're all liars, that we're all cheats, that we're all completely devoid of any integrity, so therefore it doesn't actually hit where it counts, which is at the ballot box.
We'll see in at some point in time in the near future, I guess.
Well, it's going to have to be the near future, isn't it? And again, timing will be everything, and Atagi is scheduled, I think, to give some further advice and to make decisions toward the end of January around what further advice on vaccination rollouts looks like. Meanwhile, the states are grappling with their own challenges, and the Prime Minister has to oversee all of it in a way that, to his end, in retaining his office, demonstrates that he's got the leadership chops for it. But in the meantime, he's got all these other issues, the challenges around sexual harassment, violence against women, allegations of corruption, issues with the integrity of members of his front bench. So internally, he's got a lot of work to do there too. So I think it's a question of how well he will be able to manage those issues, manage his caucus, manage changes around policy, turning points on things like climate change and energy policy and the tensions that exist there, particularly within the coalition itself, and calls from the National Party and rural members of the Liberal Party, as compared with those in the metropolitan areas. And I think also, I think it's something that is calling for a reset around what modern conservative politics actually stands for. What is it proactively rather than a reactive, saying of nay to any progressive ideas?
We could dive into that even more, but
I know, right? We've only got 6 hours for this podcast.
I do want to ask you questions. It's hard to actually review a year in politics when it's been dominated by one particular issue, which is COVID. So going back and actually trying to find in state politics things that sort of jumped out as issues or moments to discuss actually is kind of difficult to get cut through. But here's some of the ones that I did find. Starting in February, where the Parliament passed, and this feels like it was years ago now, the state Parliament passed the banning of gay conversion therapy. You yourself gave I think we talked about this when you were on the show last, probably in the middle of the year, an incredibly courageous, passionate, but articulate speech in the Parliament on that.
I do a lot of public crying about this legislation. Well, I talked about the Equal Opportunity Act just in the last sitting week and did the same thing. I mean, it's emotional stuff, though. Well, it's about saying these conversion and suppression practices, because that's what they are. It's about suppressing who somebody is in the name of religion. They're so damaging, and to be able to actually give voice to that pain that's held by so many people who can't talk about it, who won't talk about it, they're traumatised by it, and to say that this is actually really important to ban, because governments need to send messages of not only support to those people who've been injured, including those who aren't here anymore because they've killed themselves, but also to say what it means to engender equality within the statute book. And that's a really thorny issue when you're dealing with often very antiquated ideas. We, again, just dealt with the Equal Opportunity Act amendments, which will come up as a clash against the federal freedom of religion, a lot of inverted commas there, bill, and what that looks like to enable, at least as far as the feds are concerned, ongoing capacity to discriminate against LGBTIQA plus folk in employment, for example. I think as Victorians, we've come a long way in not only walking the talk, but putting resources and support behind vulnerable community members, but also being consistently there to show up. And, by way of contrast, the coalition here in Victoria, they've talked a lot about being progressive. Matthew Guy's talked, I would say, probably uncharitably ad nauseum about positivity. But when it comes to it, their voting record just says time and time again that they're not actually prepared to stand for what they say they believe in. And nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. And this is where, again, back to my earlier point, I think the modern Liberal Party, conservative politics, is at a crossroads. I think it's lost. And I think that there's a lot of soul searching going on. You can see it within what's reported about internal party matters, this old guard versus, the newer desire to reflect better what is happening in communities. And I think that's something which ultimately results in people coming to Parliament, for example, and saying, well, for the purposes of being able to discriminate against or not hire or fire somebody who's LGBTIQA plus, we don't think there's a problem. Everyone's doing the right thing already. And what about freedom of religion? And so people will say, it's the equivalent of, I'm not homophobic, but. And as I said when I spoke, there's always a but with the Liberal Party. They'll make these great statements, same with the National Party, that make these amazing statements. And if you take them at face value as campaign slogans or as lofty promises, then they sound great until you actually put them to the test. And the voting record speaks for itself. Matthew Guy didn't even turn up to the vote on the Equal Opportunity Amendment Bill.
I didn't know that.
He didn't turn up. His Shadow Minister for Equality, who was also the Shadow Minister for Mental Health, didn't turn up, and neither did the Deputy Leader, David Southwick. So when it came to the upper house, again, the coalition opposed it. And you see all these people who love to march at Pride and love to stand up and talk about their rainbow credentials. And the fact is that when the work gets hard or involves people needing to say to their stakeholders, this is where I'm going to go on this because it's actually about, things that are important that need to be beyond politics, beyond partisan politics, which is again what Matthew Guy said publicly on this issue. When you see that they vote against it, you can see that their words actually count for nothing.
We'll come back to them in a moment.
See what's happened here?
No.
And thus it became dark outside.
Exactly.
And the two continued to talk. Yeah.
In March, the Premier had a literal fall, slipping and seriously hurting his back. That was an interesting moment for government because obviously the Deputy Premier, James Malone, had to step up and take on the acting role. And obviously it's kind of like in a sporting team, you lose one of your best players, you've got to make some adjustments. But it was, I felt that the government showed its depth, that it battered deep. Sorry, I keep on using sporting analogies.
No, I understand what you mean on that one. I think I've used it myself before.
Right, which is I think a testament to the broader team that you guys have in government. That you can make those adjustments, and not besmirching the Premier. That you just get rid of this guy, and all of a sudden things are great. But it showed that you guys could step up and continue to work through it at a moment in time when the state was going through a continuation of this COVID crisis. And I just thought that it was a remarkable achievement. What were your reflections on that moment when you first found out that Daniel had hurt himself and you weren't sure how long he was going to be out for and how that would impact on you guys as a caucus?
Yeah, well, firstly, I was really worried and I consider Daniel a really good friend as well as the fact that he's my boss. And I know that he was looking forward to announcing the Uruk Truth and Justice Commission that day, which James ended up doing. To know that he was in fact so seriously injured was one thing. To know that he was getting such great care, particularly in the environment of a pandemic, to have such amazing response from healthcare workers, from the paramedics, from those who provided him with immediate treatment was bizarrely and ironically testament to the work of numerous health ministers, himself included. But I think that one of the things that I was not just dismayed about but really angry about was the fact that it galvanised this tinfoil hat conspiracy lightning rod for people, including people in the state parliament. As you'll recall, there was a press release issued by someone, I think rather desperate to hold on to relevance and perhaps a majority of more than a handful of votes, who put these questions that amounted to almost a McCarthyist-style interrogation of what it was that the Premier had been doing. And if you think about that alongside the simmering cesspit of QAnon and these bizarre conspiracy theories about, lizard people and, and 5G chips, you can see how it was that worked its way into a narrative and the rumour mill went into overdrive and people were actively looking for these bizarre plots to uncover. And the argument that was run by people in certain quarters of the state opposition, along with parts of the media, and I don't think that this is journalism. I just think that it's running these bizarre narratives to pass for content. of saying, well, if you've got nothing to hide, then just answer the questions.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, that's actually not how the rule of law works. It's not how the parliament should function. It's not any measure of integrity by the people who are asking those questions. The guy fractured his spine. You know, we're not talking about something that happened whereby Troy McClure from The Simpsons rocks up to court with, you know, a fluffy neck brace on and seeks to get out of something. We're talking about fractured vertebrae. We're talking about serious injury. And it beggars belief that these were the lowest common denominator approaches and tactics used by people simply to gain a momentary sugar hit in mainstream media. And the fact that then it turned into these rumours. I was hearing these rumours from people who I had previously considered to be relatively level-headed, saying, "Oh, Harriet, I think you should know that people are in fact saying that, you know, Daniel is in fact a shape-shifting lizard." I mean, they weren't saying that, but, you know, things that were just as outlandish. So, you know, you might want to get onto that. You know,
yeah, it was insane. What pissed me off actually was that there were Liberal MPs who are, you know, democratically elected members of what I would regard as a mainstream centre-right political party that adheres to basic governance and liberal democratic norms, weaponising this conspiracy theory, this QAnon crazy bullshit at press conferences, you know, standing up in front of the fourth estate, right, and saying these things, and then them sort of taking the story along. I texted a journalist who I really respect, who asked a question about the ambulance, or how did Daniel get to the hospital or whatever, and I said, "You're not for real, are you?" And they called me back straight away. Went, "Oh, what do you mean?" I said, "Oh, mate, come on, this is bullshit. This is all bullshit. You shouldn't even be giving this any airtime."
But this is the climate that we're in. And again, when you look at what's happened to incite dissent based on nothing more tenuous than a rumour, this is what has been fomented, that people see as their right and their entitlement in the name of, you know, truth and freedom and justice, the ability to terrorise people in a way that is deeply personal, is absolutely scandalous and has little, if any, basis in truth. And when you think about the environment that preceded that was created by the Premier standing up for over 120 days in a row to do press conferences on really intricate detail, to work alongside the Health Minister and the Chief Health Officer and the Chief Commander and various experts to explain directly to Victorians what the detail of the pandemic response was. You can then also see that perhaps that loss of control around the narrative was almost like a slingshot that had to come back to some sort of centre as far as conjecture and hypotheses was concerned, and that's in fact what happened. And just to pick up on your earlier description of the coalition in terms of centre-right adherence of democracy, you just have to look at the Facebook accounts, the social media accounts of some of the members of the coalition, particularly in the upper house, and you can see that they firstly get to say whatever they want. Secondly, it often constitutes, in my mind, and you know, this is my opinion, hate speech or vilification, that it incites violence, that it is completely irresponsible, and that it pays lip service to the idea of public service. And I'm all for rigour. I'm all for really extensive debate and discussion that's based in fact and based in reality. But I think it's not only highly irresponsible, it's actually damaging to then go and fling something into the social media ether without any sense of responsibility and then to say that that's just freedom of expression. And you see the true measure of a leader is the fact that they won't pull people up on that. That Matthew Guy, when he's been faced time and time again with examples of this sort of appalling online behaviour, just says, well, this person's a colourful character, or I will have to speak to them again. And there's never actually any demonstration of accountability, which means that the person who wants to be the leader, who wants to lead the state, doesn't actually have any track record of having a spine.
He's weak. And do you know the thing that astounded me to the next, I might say it's a highlight because it was a terrible thing because someone almost could have been seriously injured, but then Tim Smith crashing his car, the way that was handled by Matthew Guy I thought was bizarre, because I think in the end Matthew Guy had to go down and see Tim Smith at
Beau Morris, I think he drove down to see him.
Yeah, from Templestowe, wherever Matt Guy lives, which I think is extraordinary. I would have got on the phone to Tim Smith, I was the leader, and I said, you get your ass to my house in the next hour. I don't care how the hell you get here. I know you clearly haven't got your license anymore because you'd lost that because you're drunk and full, but you get your ass to my house in the next hour, or else your career is on the line.
But what makes you think that didn't happen? And this is where, again, it's that whole idea of these brittle egos and people who I think fall into the trap when they get into politics of thinking that it's about them, and therefore the sense of entitlement that comes with accountability, meaning that they just go, no, whatever.
Well, I know, but then he just Tim Smith dragged it out for however many days when it
was fascinating. It was fascinating to see that level of very clear tension between the two of them, and then Josh Frydenberg sitting on the side as well. I find it really. I find a lot of politics really hard to understand. Right? It's something that doesn't necessarily in every way come naturally to me. I watched that all unfold, and I was kind of astounded, but then I was simultaneously a bit resigned to the fact that it was never actually going to be a straight mea culpa. That, in fact, when Tim Smith stood up in front of the cameras, and, props to him for actually standing in front of a press pack. I respect that, because I think that sort of thing, you are required to be visible as a public figure, and you are required to, in fact, be accountable. And so, a tick for that one.
Meanwhile, Matt Guy's own private office is back around.
That's right. Well, there is that.
To the journalists asking questions.
Yeah. But then also the fact that Smith, as I recall, made a couple of comments about saying, if I get to stay in public life, I'll never touch it. I'll never touch a drop of alcohol again as long as I'm in public life. And that to me sort of missed the point, because that plus, and I think he said at the time, I'm not going to play the mental health card, which was, I actually found pretty disgraceful, and I think he probably should have worked up his talking points a little better than that. But when I was listening to the way in which he was talking to the press pack, it felt to me like it was about being called to the principal's office for an action that he'd been busted for. And that's, to my mind, not how politics should work. Again, I respect him for showing up, but I think that that's about where it went off a cliff.
Yeah, he had not even considered the repercussions of his actions. There was no reflection. And he said, I think he said the word reflection a lot, but he actually wasn't reflecting on his actions. Yeah,
that's right. And he talked about mitigating factors, and he was clearly really upset. But was he upset because he'd been caught? Was he upset because there were consequences? Was he upset because of perhaps not getting the level of support that he was looking for internally? It's hard to know. None of us will ever know. But I think that it all feeds back to the fact that I think people think that politicians are terrible anyway. So what does that mean as far as highlighting the examples of people who do the right thing? And this is, again, I think a measure of integrity of individuals who are prepared to stand up and say, you know what, I've stuffed up. And he did actually say that, it was a terrible error. And that was really important. And it's really important particularly for those in the community who've been affected by drink driving, by drug and alcohol affected drivers. Road trauma it's a massive issue. So I think that was an important thing for him to have said as a public figure, but I think there was a whole lot else in it that that really pulled away from his opportunity to be seen for his contrition, but also then to perhaps springboard that into something else. I think there's always an opportunity to take something awful and to make it into something better.
And I think the standard he had set in his role as a politician, accusing everyone else whenever they had slipped up for whatever reasons, of saying, you should get fired, you should get sacked for this. You know, you looked the wrong way, you should get sacked. You tweeted this, you should get sacked. Constantly calling on people to get sacked.
Yes.
And then it's back on him, and now he's not prepared to live by the standards that he has set for others.
Yeah, I think you do have to be careful about the rocks that you fling. I have a great deal of difficulty with the way in which he's personalised politics as well. I think that it doesn't need to be that way. I featured on the front page of a certain newspaper early in the year when I took annual leave and went up to Queensland with a friend and colleague, Lisa Neville. Somebody hid in the bushes and took a photograph. That happened at the same time that the Yallourn power plant had announced its 7-year notice period, at which point he put out some tweet, saying I was a disgrace for sipping cocktails while people were losing their jobs. It's not only really disrespectful of colleagues who genuinely try to do the right thing, it's cheap. It's cheap politics. And I think Tim's got an opportunity to be better than cheap politics. I understand he's not in the country at the moment, at least by way of the public reports that are circulating. I hope he does turn this into something that can be better than what caused it all in the first place.
The last thing that sort of happened this year, obviously, which kind of dominated the media cycle, certainly in the last couple of months, was the pandemic legislation.
What a time. 20 odd hours in the upper house that we'll never get back.
Yeah, I know.
Plus the weeks and weeks of procedural debate and discussions. Yes.
Looking back on all of that, and it kind of the embers was sort of, I think, it publicly ignited anyway with the protests out the front of the CFMEU offices. I'm sure it had been simmering away, on the dark web or wherever, some, those dark corners of the internet that I don't really give a shit about, for a while there. But certainly came to our attention in the media around the protests out the front of the CFMEU offices on Elizabeth Street. And then it kind of kicked on from there. I didn't think it actually would sustain. I kind of thought it would sort of fizzle out, but it sort of kept going, albeit still not a lot of people really when you think about it. You keep reminding yourself that, hang on, 94% of the Victorian population have been vaccinated, and there's only a small group that haven't yet. The media kept elevating this small group to front pages of the paper and on the 6 o'clock news. Some of the student rallies that we got in my NUS days had more people at the rally than they did in the city. We didn't get the news coverage that they did. But anyway, I think the media's got to play a bit of should reflect on their own actions as well. But what are your reflections on that whole journey right through to then the pandemic bill? Did this response by a very, 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 very small section of the community reflect? Did it deserve that kind of backlash, do you think, in terms of the legislation that you guys that the government passed?
Well, I think when you read the legislation, and I suspect that not many people have, that when you read the legislation and you read the 19 odd reports that have been tabled in the Parliament of health advice, and you look at the content of the 120 days that the Premier did of stand-ups in front of the media for unlimited periods of time, plus the additional updates that the Health Minister provided alongside the Chief Health Officer, the Deputy Health Officer, the Chief Commander, the Chief Psychiatrist, nurses, paramedics, people who were at the front line in terms of law enforcement. There was so much information. There is so much information. And there is so much information, I think, that perversely that created a bit of an opportunity for misinformation to take hold. And when we look at coordinated programs and campaigns that have arisen, particularly internationally. There is a community which works really hard to create division and dissent and to distribute misinformation through a variety of different channels for a variety of different purposes. And you can see from the protests the different sorts of flags and the different signs and, you know, the people who were disgracefully parading nooses at the front of Parliament. They came from a number of different angles, and it was often hard to tell exactly what any individual group was asking for. They were really critical, mostly of the Premier and of the pandemic response, of the lockdowns, of the denial of, you know, of personal rights and freedoms, but and vaccines, of course. But what they actually wanted differed dramatically depending on which part of those protests you were, you know, talking to. And when we think about fear and we think about misinformation and the way that was galvanised, a lot of the recent protests have seen people from a number of different migrant communities, people from Aboriginal First Nations communities who have fears and concerns based in history and based in context and based in, you know, geopolitical experience that they've had as communities who fled very oppressive political regimes. Again, that fear has been drawn out in this sort of lightning rod of misinformation, and that's where I think that it's been incumbent upon people to actually do their best across party lines to correct that wherever possible, to facilitate the distribution of accurate information, to give people like Norman Swan or the Faucis of the world equal footing to those people who want to run a controversial post on Facebook with the Premier depicted as, you know, as Hitler. I think media has to decide what it is going to do around journalism and the way in which it involves needing to understand and analyse a situation and to do more than just reflect the noisiest and most destructive elements of any particular part of a debate. And I think that's been a really significant issue that I think has come to the fore for a lot of people. It's turned a lot of people off discussion around the protests and again, I think that the legitimate concerns that people have, that particularly around vaccine hesitancy, particularly around misinformation, these are problems and concerns and fears that can in the main be addressed when they're the subject of a conversation between, say, a pharmacist or a GP or a teacher or, you know, or a member of the police force, to say what is happening to me, what are my requirements around QR codes, what is this information being used for, and to work through that methodically. But as far as news is concerned, that's a boring answer because it involves just doing the work and stepping it out. And I think that the problem that we increasingly have with the way in which current affairs are reported is that boring doesn't cut it. Because boring doesn't make headlines, boring doesn't give you ratings, boring doesn't do anything except for address and correct misinformation on a case-by-case basis. And I think that's where we need to address what the real priorities are.
And then so you see, is it David Davis or Bernie Finn or any of those guys then go out and actually give the protesters airtime? Well,
yeah, in the name of freedom of expression, and this is where Craig Ondarchie referred to them as wonderful people. David Davis addressed them. Catherine Cummings addressed them on a number of occasions. Bernie Finn has been out there. David Limbrick from the Liberal Democrats. These, you know, again, people come into politics and come to positions of elected responsibility for all sorts of different reasons. Fraser Anning and his 19 primary votes came to it for a very different set of reasons to you know, Christina Kennelly, for example. I disagree passionately with what it is that they're doing. I will argue until the cows come home about why what they're saying is wrong and is damaging and is actually creating a ripple effect that they either don't know about or don't care about, or are in fact very happy to see cause mayhem and damage across the board. what I'm not happy about is that being done in the name of the parliamentary system. And like, I'm so old school in this regard. I'm a hopeless romantic when it comes to the rule of law. I love the technical detail. I think that you've got a really enormous responsibility as an MP to understand the impact of what it is that you're saying, and to not only meet people on their level, but to do the right thing around correcting misinformation. And that's where it's the measure of various MPs to see when that doesn't happen.
It's irresponsible.
It's flagrant. And again, you look not at what they're doing, but at why, and you can see very clearly that certain quarters, particularly within coalition ranks, they don't aspire to government for any reason other than to do nothing or to dismantle progressive structures, decision-making, resources, funding, or investment that are intended to either reduce inequality or to improve opportunity. It's about a free market for them, which is a do whatever you want kind of situation.
Yeah, the Liberal Party is so much like, I always think that my beloved football team, Celtic, the creative, romantic, cavalier football team that were founded out of the reason of creating, started by the Catholic Church in the east end of Glasgow to raise money to pay for feeding the poor and the starving Irish Catholic population of the east end of Glasgow. And then there's the Rangers Football Club with the establishment, who basically today exists to stop us from winning championships. So
is this like a Collingwood Melbourne Football Club?
Probably a little bit, really, And I think the Liberal Party today are they're like Rangers. They exist because they want to stop us from creating change.
And when you look at that as a binary system, you can see that across the board, communities do better under Labor governments, that balance sheets are healthier under Labor governments, and that's a very inconvenient truth for those who love to talk about trickle-down economics and back in black, and then, and I suppose strike a blow to the economic credentials of Labor. This stuff doesn't stack up until you run a narrative repeatedly in media that runs unchallenged that says, in fact, Labor can't deliver these things. And the difficulty, I think, for the coalition here in Victoria at a state and federal level is when people look around, they can see that schools have been built and that level crossings have been removed and that hospitals are getting upgraded and all of this infrastructure that makes for a better life experience. It makes for better communities. It makes for better facilities. It makes for better support and, I suppose, care in times where people need it most. And you don't get that under coalition governments. And that's why I think that Victoria it's a great challenge for the Liberal Party that used to call this state the jewel in its crown.
It's remarkable.
It is remarkable.
And on that positive note, because I want to end on a positive note.
Yes.
Harriet Shing, thank you so much once again for coming on the show.
Our traditional catch-up.
I know, I love it. But I need to do my homework, my admin homework before we wrap up, and say thanks to, first of all of our guests that have come on the show in 2021. I think we've done 50 shows this year, and we thank them for their time and their contribution. Thanks to our presenting sponsors, Dunn Street and Morris Blackburn Lawyers. Thank you to our producer, Rebecca Connell, whom without her, there is actually no podcast. She books all the guests, researches all the topics, makes me sound vaguely smart, records, edits, publishes the episodes, and then does all the social media promo. So Rebecca, thank you. And lastly, to all of our loyal listeners and subscribers to Social Democratic, both here in Australia and around the globe, thank you to each and every one of you for supporting the show by listening, liking, retweeting, posting, and spreading the word amongst your network of other Social Democrats. And we want to wish you and your families a safe, healthy, happy, and holy Festivus as we look forward to seeing you all in our 4th season next year of Socially Democratic. We're going to take a week off next week, and we're back in the first week of the new year. Harriet Shing, Nolig Hona Ditch.
L'chaim. That's all I've got.
That's good enough for me.
Thank you.
Peace out. Thank you for coming on once again.
It's always a pleasure. Take care and have a wonderful and happy and connected Christmas and festive season. And I would just urge everyone to take care of each other and to be kind. I think that's been the great strength that's come shining through in spades over the last year, and I think we should hold on to that.
Love it.
Take care.